One of my favorite ways to transform my home from summer decor to fall decor is by using sunflowers, and luckily the Dollar Tree has some things to help with that. I saw this over-the-door wreath hanger at the Dollar Tree with the sunflowers at the top, so I knew I wanted to make a wreath to hang from it. Now, when I create wreaths, I like to pick out things that kind of do some of the work for me. So I found these flower picks at the Dollar Tree that have a lot of different elements on them. You can see they have the mini sunflowers and some wheatgrass and some other leaves and things like that. So I don't have to worry about arranging the flowers myself. I also picked up one of these beaded wreath forms. The beads are already on a wire, so that job is already done for me. Then I dug around in my stash and I found some sunflower ribbon. Now I can't quite remember where I got this from. If I can find it on Amazon, I'll link it below, but I'm not really sure if that's where I got it from. I felt that the stem on these floral picks was just a bit too long for the wreath form that I'm using, so I just took a pair of wire cutters and I cut about 1.5 inches off the bottom of each of the floral picks so that they would fit across the bottom of my wreath form a little bit better. I also made sure to bend the bottom stems a bit so that it would fit the curve of the wreath that I'm using. If I'm able to, I'd rather not glue anything onto certain wreath forms so that I can reuse them later. So for this wreath, I'm using zip ties, and you can see I just laid my 2 floral picks right over where that metal clasp was on this wreath form. And I find it's easier if I put one zip tie on and don't tighten it the whole way down. And then I add my second zip tie, and once I have that one in place, then I go back through and tighten them both down. That just helps keep everything from sliding around and make sure that it's in the right spot. I did notice while I was at the Dollar Tree that they had some pre-made bows with a sunflower print on them, but since I already had this ribbon in my stash, I figured I would just make my own. So this bow is going to be pretty simple. I just cut 3 lengths of the ribbon, and I'm using 2 of them to form my loops. You can see I just folded them both over on themselves. And then I take a piece of jute twine and I cinch them both together and tie it with the jute twine. Once I have both of those loops tied together, then I go through and I tie the tails on separate. I know a lot of people will just cinch all 3 pieces together, but for me, it's a little bit easier if I do it in 2 separate sections. I don't know why, I just always feel like my tails lay a little bit better that way. Once I had the bow how I liked it, I made sure that I dovetailed both of the ends of the ribbon, and then to attach it to my wreath form, I did use a little bit of hot glue, but just on the flower stems. I made sure that I didn't get any on those wooden beads so that I could reuse this wreath. And because I used that jute cord to tie all of my ribbons together, I left the tails long enough that once that glue had a chance to set a bit, I flipped it over and I was able to use that jute cord just to tie it on and make sure that it was nice and secure. Now, because I have that nice wreath hanger from the Dollar Tree, I didn't add a hanger to the top of this wreath. And as a final touch for my bow, instead of adding a center loop like you see in the Dollar Tree picture, I decided just to add a little bit more sunflowers. So I took a sunflower from another floral pick and a leaf, and I glued that right to the center of my bow. One of my favorite things to create is a garland to hang across the front of my fireplace. Now I'm showing you some burlap flowers here and some little paper sunflowers, but I'm actually not going to use any of those in this. I kind of switched gears halfway through. But you will need some sort of nautical rope. I have a roll here from the Dollar Tree. I also have a few ribbons that I found at the Dollar Tree. And I am going to be using some wider burlap ribbon. I got this at Michael's. They don't usually carry anything like this at the Dollar Tree, but I really like this burlap because it has a finer weave and it's serged on both sides, so it tends not to unravel so easily. For my garland, I wanted to create some pennants, and I wanted them to be made of this burlap, but I found in the past when I've used burlap like that, it tends to curl up. So in order to make sure that it doesn't curl up once I cut it out, I'm using some regular cardboard here. This is just an old Amazon box, and I laid the ribbon over over it, and I'm cutting a piece of cardboard that is not quite as wide as my ribbon. So I laid my ribbon down and I made sure it overlapped the bottom of that cardboard, and then I just cut a piece out that was narrower than my ribbon. You can see it has about 1/4 inch on each side. Now to get started creating the pennant shapes, I have my cutting mat down here. So I'm starting across the bottom and I'm just marking every 3 inches. So with my pencil here, you can see I went from the bottom corner and I went over to that first mark 3 inches, and I marked 3 inches the whole way across. Then on the opposite side, I'm starting about 1.5 inches in, and I created another pencil mark. And then from that 1.5 inches, I went another 3 inches. The reason I'm going in 1.5 inches before I mark my 3-inch marks is because I want to create that pennant shape. So since I'm doing a 3-inch base on my pennants, I wanted to cut that in half by 1.5 inches, and that's going to give me my center point. So you can see now that all of my pencil marks are in place, I'm switching to a marker here so you can see a little bit better. I'm just connecting all of those lines. So across the bottom where I had those 3-inch marks, I just drew a line up to that first 1.5 inch mark. And then from there, I'm able to connect all of the lines and dots that I created. And this is going to give me my pennant shape. So you see every time I create a line, I have pennants going across the bottom and then across the top also. And because this is cardboard, it's super easy to just cut out using a utility knife. You can see I'm just laying my ruler down and going through it a few times, and it's cutting that off. So once I have that first little wedge cut off, now I'm in all of my pennant shapes. And depending on what length of cardboard you use will depend on how many you can go the whole way across. So just keep that in mind anytime you need to create these pennant shapes. Whatever width you're using for the base of yours, like I said, I'm doing a 3-inch width. So my point is going to be at the 1.5 inch mark. So whatever your base is, just divide that in half, and that's where you know you need to start your second set of marks. Now that I have my cardboard all cut out, I have my piece of burlap ribbon here, and I'm using my silicone mat because this is burlap. It could seep through a bit. So I'm running a fine line of hot glue across the top of one of my triangles, and I'm laying that on the very edge of my burlap. Now, like I said before, this burlap ribbon from Michaels, both ends of the burlap are serged so that it has a nice place that you can set this cardboard down, and a lot of that glue will stay in place, but like I said, just be careful because sometimes it does ooze out. And I'm just repeating that the whole way down. I think I chose to do 6 pennants for my garland, so I'm only laying 6 triangles on mine. But depending on how long you want your garland to be, you can create as many as you want. And you can see here, I'm also leaving about 3/4 inch space in between each of my triangles so that I have room to cut everything out. Once it's all glued out, then I'm going through with a really sharp pair of scissors and I'm just cutting up both sides of my cardboard. And now my burlap is in place on that cardboard and it has this nice banner shape. And again, because we left about 3/4 inch in between each of the triangles, I'm able to just cut up through on both sides and I have enough space to create my little pennants. As I mentioned before, I'm not using any of the sunflowers that I first showed you. I do want to glue a sunflower in the center of each of these triangles, but the orange ones that I showed were too big and the little paper ones are too small, but I did have another set that fit just right. So I laid a little hot glue under the burlap on that cardboard, and then I used more hot glue on top so that I could glue a sunflower in the center of my triangle. And like I said before, in the past, when I've made different types of garlands and banners with burlap, it seems that after I hang it, I don't know if it's the moisture in the air or what it is, but the fabric tends to curl and it doesn't stay in place. So that's why I wanted to use the cardboard behind it. Since it's the same color as the burlap, you really can't see that it's there. But because we glued that burlap to the cardboard, it'll keep a nice triangle shape now. So I just went through on each of my triangles and glued a sunflower to the center. I also wanted to add a second element to my garland. So I'm using some ribbon from the Dollar Tree. You can see the one is a really pretty blue color with sunflowers on it, and the other one is just an orange, and they both have this metallic gold edging on it, which I think is so pretty. So I wanted to prep some of these ribbons before I start assembling my garland. I cut a 12-inch length of each of the ribbons. And on the end of each of the ribbons, I cut it to a slant. So for the blue ribbon, I cut it from the left side going up, and for the orange ribbon, I cut it from the right side going down. That way, when they faced each other, they were facing in opposite directions. And the reason I did that is because I wanted them to flow a little bit different from each other. And I also felt that this ribbon was too narrow to cut a dovetail into, so that's why I just created a slant on each of them. Now I'm ready to add everything to my nautical rope, so I'm starting with one of my triangles first, and I just laid a bead of hot glue across the top on the cardboard, and I found it's easier if I lay the triangle down and then press the rope into it rather than trying to put the triangle on top of the rope. So I went through first, and I wanted to lay all of my triangles in place before I added in my ribbons, and I left about 4 inches in between each of my triangles. Once all of my triangles were glued down, then I could go through and start adding my ribbons. I grabbed one of the orange ribbons and one of the sunflower ribbons, and I made sure that the sunflower was on top because I really wanted to see that more than the orange ribbon. I found the center of both of the ribbons, and then I laid that over my nautical rope so that the center was at the top of the nautical rope. I found it was easiest if I used a craft clip here just to keep those ribbons in place. And then I went through with a small piece of jute cord and I just tied the 2 ribbons together on the rope. Once I had that jute cord in place, I did go ahead and tug on the ribbons a bit because it helped tighten it up towards the nautical rope. I zoomed in a little so you can see here better. Once I found the center of those ribbons, like I said, I just laid it over that nautical rope, and then I used that craft clip to help hold it in place. And then I went through with the jute cord and I tied it as far up as I could. And whenever I pulled the jute cord tight, it cinched the ribbons together, and that fanned them out a little bit. But really what helped show the 2 ribbons off is when I went through and started tugging and separating all of them, and it made it look more like a tassel. Also keep in mind, I'm using sunflowers today, but this Garland has such a simple base to it. This would be a great way to customize it to fit your home's decor. You don't have to use sunflowers. You could put anything you want on the little triangles, and then you could use any color or any pattern of ribbon for the little tassels in between. I'm always looking for ways to add touches of decorations to my kitchen. I saw these little paper sunflowers at the Dollar Tree and I knew they would make great magnets. To get started, I'm using a pack of the bigger paper sunflowers, and I'm also going to use some clothespins. You can get these at the Dollar Tree, but I think they might be a little bit of a better deal from Walmart. And I don't know about you, but I still love buffalo check, and I think black and white plaid looks so good with sunflowers. So I have some of that ribbon in my stash, and I'm also going to use a few magnets. You can find these at the Dollar Tree as well. This is probably going to be the quickest craft that we'll do today. I started by laying a small bead of hot glue across the top of my clothespin. I lined the edge of my ribbon up with the edge of the clothespin, and then right at the other edge of the clothespin, I just snipped that excess ribbon off. Now, the reason that I thought these paper flowers would be perfect for a magnet is because they're very lightweight. And anytime you're using a magnet, you want to make sure that you're not adding too much weight to it because it'll just keep sliding down your refrigerator or wherever you choose to hang it. So you can see here, once I clipped off that little wire stem from that sunflower, then I just added more hot glue and I glued my sunflower to the center. On the back side, I used some hot glue for my magnet. I was going to hold it in place with some clear tape, but then I realized that my tape was too wide and it was much wider than the clothespin. So you can see that magnet came together in no time at all. I chose to do just 4 magnets because that's all I really need for my refrigerator, but you could make as many as you want. I think this would be a really sweet gift to give to somebody. And for any of you that like to go to craft fairs and set up booths, I think this would make a great craft fair project because it comes together so quick. The major cost for these would be the magnets, but like I said, you can get those little disc magnets from the Dollar Tree, and you might be able to find some cheaper magnets on Amazon too. So if I was going to set up at a craft fair with these, I would probably group 4 or 5 of these together, and I think that people would really love to buy these, especially to give as gifts. I'm using one of the paper towel holders that you can get at the Dollar Tree as a way to add more sunflowers to my kitchen. I also have one of these styrofoam discs. You can see this one is 1 inch by 5.8 inches. I did pick this up at Michael's because I couldn't find any at my Dollar Tree, although I thought I have seen them there in the past. I'm also going to use some silk sunflowers. The great thing about this foam disc is that it fits perfectly on the base of my paper towel holder. Now I know from the past using hot glue on metal doesn't always work, so I wanted to create a little bit of an anchor to secure that paper towel holder to this foam disc. So you can see I'm using a scrap piece of floral wire here, and I used my pliers to bend it into a U shape. So kind of think of it as a staple. I did go ahead and add some hot glue to the base of the paper towel holder just to hold it in place on that disc while I work on these anchors. Now that I have that U-shape wire cut out, I'm able to add a little bit of hot glue over one of the joint pieces on that paper towel holder, and I just pressed that U-shaped floral wire right over top of it, and that's going to hold it in place nice and secure. So you can see here, I'm going to create a second one. I should have zoomed in here, but you kind of get the idea. I'm just using a pair of pliers here, and I'm just bending that into a U shape. You probably could even just bend it into a V, and I think that would work just as well. It's just to help anchor it down on top of that paper towel holder to make it more secure. Now, in order to cover up the base of this paper towel holder, I'm just using a piece of felt. I have this green felt that matches the leaves of these sunflowers. I traced around the base of it, and I'm cutting it out with scissors. One tip I have is anytime you're cutting out felt, make sure that you have a really sharp pair of scissors, because I feel like felt is just one of those materials that's really hard to cut out unless your scissors are super sharp. So I actually keep a pair of scissors in my craft room that I only use on material. I have a mom that loves to sew, and growing up, if I ever got caught cutting paper with her fabric scissors, I was always in big trouble. And now I find that I only use these scissors for fabric and felt. So you can see once I have my circle cut out, I just folded it in half and I cut a little slit, and it slides right down over that paper towel holder perfectly to cover up those little wires. And the last thing I needed to do was just add my sunflowers. So I clipped a bunch of them off of the floral pick, and I'm trying to show you here that I'm sticking them in at the top and angling them down. That way they'll sit away from the base of the styrofoam and they'll sit flat on the counter. I think because the center of these sunflowers was a bit wide, if I would have poked them straight into the styrofoam, it would have lifted the whole paper towel holder off of the surface and made it a bit wobbly. But by placing it towards the top of the styrofoam and angling it downward, it lifted the sunflower up, which made the paper towel holder sit flat on the surface. As I was putting this together, I realized that I hadn't glued any of the sunflowers in place or that felt piece in place, so this could easily be switched out for other holidays and seasons. Nothing is glued down, so you could pull all the sunflowers out and replace it with Christmas flowers and even a different color piece of felt if you needed to. A while back on my channel, I made one of these stenciled pumpkin signs, and I wanted to try doing the same thing with a sunflower. I grabbed 3 of these long signs that you can always find at the Dollar Tree, and I also found this really large felt sunflower that measures about 16 inches. I couldn't get a good measurement here. My ruler's only 12 inches, but it looks like it's about 4 inches longer than my ruler. I started by removing everything from the sign. So there's some rope around the front, and then there's a rope hanger. And then on the front of this sign, there's a little metal house. I thought it was metal, but then once I pried it up with my little spatula, I saw that it was just cardboard. So that was actually pretty easy to remove. I'm going to be working on the back side of these signs, but I wanted to make sure that I had everything off of the front. Now these signs measure about 6 inches wide. They're not exactly 6 inches, and that's okay. The idea here is you just want to cut these signs down into 3 pieces. So I'm using my longer ruler here, and I'm cutting it at about 2 inches. It's not exact, and that's okay. I want this to look really rustic, so I don't mind if the pieces are a little bit uneven. Now when I cut these signs from the Dollar Tree, I always find it's easier if I use my utility knife and just apply light pressure and do several strokes. So you can see I had cut through it several times, and when I tried pushing on it, it didn't quite break. So then I went through with my utility knife and I went back over that same groove quite a few more times. And then once I got down far enough, I was able to push on the sign and it just broke off where I had cut it. Now, like I said before, I want to cut these signs down into 3 strips. So once I had that first strip removed, then I just went through and cut the other section in half. So once I was done cutting all of my signs down, I had 9 strips altogether. I took 7 of those strips and I laid them out, and I make sure that they were spaced out enough that my sunflower would fit over the top of them. And you can see here that I have all of my strips with the printed side that was on them facing up, because this is going to be the back side of my sign. So once I had all of those strips spaced out and I knew that my sunflower would fit on them, I'm just using some painter's tape to hold all of them in place until I can brace them all down. Now for the other 2 strips that are left over, I'm going to use those to brace everything together. They're a bit too long. I know you can't really see the bottom of the screen here. I didn't have enough room in my camera, but I'm just taking a quick measurement as to where the bottom of my sign is so that I can cut these strips down so that they fit in my sign. Once my strips were cut, then I could start bracing everything together. So you can see I'm laying hot glue along each of those horizontal strips. And then I laid my brace piece over top. And again, I made sure that the printed side faced me because this is the back side of the sign. And you can see I went in a few inches from either side to put my brace pieces down. And then those 2 pieces that were left over from cutting those last 2 strips, I'm just going to place in the center, and I'm just going to make sure that where the 2 ends meet is in the middle of that center strip so that you can't tell that it's 2 separate pieces from the front. And here I am pretending to paint this sign because I forgot to hit record the first time I painted it. But you can see here I'm using some green chalk paint, and I left a little bit of that wooden color show through because, like I said, I do want this to have a rustic look. Once my paint was dry, then I took some painter's tape and I just started creating little loops with the painter's tape. And I think I added about 4 along the back side of this sunflower. And that's just to temporarily hold it in place. So once I had all of that tape down, then I flipped my sunflower over and I centered it on my pallet sign. I went outside and I'm using this spray paint by Rust-Oleum. It's an ultra matte white spray paint. And I just gave 1 light coat over top of the entire sign. So I made sure that I covered all of the palette and all of that sunflower because this sunflower is going to be our stencil. After my paint dried, I lifted up my sunflower to reveal the pattern underneath. Thanks so much for coming to hang out with me again today. Let me know in the comments which one of these was your favorite. All right, everyone, I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.